Hi, my name is Brandy Knight, and my presentation is on the Reign of Terror's impact on the political participation of Parisian workers. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of give you just a little bit of background on the French Revolution and get into these Parisian workers that shaped the French Revolution. So first, let me get this off of here. There we go. So the French Revolution was the most transformative period in history, and it brought about a massive amount of political and social upheaval to France. And this wasn't just simply about food shortages or just an unfair monarchy. There's this major shift that is happening, particularly in Europe, with the Enlightenment and people starting to question absolute rule and divine right and social inequality. And we have John Locke and Montesquieu and Rousseau that are arguing, and we can go into these Parisian salons where these intellectual people are coming together and questioning government and the will of the people and unchecked powers of monarchies. And these ideas are going to spread, again, you know, through these Parisian salons, and in books and writings, and eventually into the American Revolution. And so we come to 1789. The revolution in France is driven by widespread economic hardship, deep class division, and frustration with the monarchy's failure to address the people. And of course, if you know anything about Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI, they are not popular. They are seen as lavish, uncaring of the people, and you know, there's food shortages, and so people aren't happy at this time. And then we will eventually, once the revolution begins, a few years after we get into the Reign of Terror, and that's really where I want to focus on, is the Reign of Terror that takes place in 1793 to 1794. And it is going to be a time of a lot of political violence, and there's this group known as the Sans-Culottes. And they're kind of this radical movement of working class Parisians, and they're going to gain some political influence at this time. But, you know, despite their early success, and we'll kind of get into that just a little bit, they're eventually going to be suppressed in their movement and no longer needed by the leaders of the government at that time. So let's look closer at the Sans-Culottes. Okay, so the Sans-Culottes were one of the most radical groups of the French Revolution, and they're going to be made up primarily of Parisian workers and small shopkeepers and artisans. The name Sans-Culottes literally means without knee breeches, and so this group that was originally part of that third estate, the lower part of the third estate, they're the working class, and they're going to reject all things that have to do with the aristocracy, including their fancy attire. So they're going to wear those long trousers. You can see the difference in the picture that I have with the aristocracy on the left side, and the stockings and the trousers. And so Sans-Culottes is going to reject that, and they are going to demand economic justice. They're going to demand equal participation. And unlike the wealthier bourgeoisie at the time, the Sans-Culottes did not want political change. Again, they want that economic justice. They want their rights. They want to have more voice in the government, and not just voting. They want to ensure that the needs of the ordinary people are being met. And they are going to use very aggressive tactics in uprisings and attacks on their enemies of the revolution, and use fear. That's going to be kind of controversial at the time, but sometimes, and I've read something about desperate times called for desperate measures, and so they they will take it to some extremes. And if we go back into 1789, the beginning of the revolution, and we start with the storming of the Bastille, the storming of the Bastille symbolizes the people's defiance against the monarchy's oppression, their willingness to take direct action. And so the Bastille is not really just as a prison that they're trying to overcome. It's kind of represents the royal tyranny, and where political prisoners are held at the king's discretion. And when the sans-culottes and other revolutionary crowds stormed this fortress, it was kind of a clear message to the people of Paris that they're not going to accept absolute rule. And if you see on the other side of that picture, they've got heads on pikes, and they will parade those severed heads around, and it's going to be a means of demonstrating their control and send a warning to those who are opposing the revolution. And it is kind of shocking. And again, we come to the Women's March, which happens a few months later after the Bastille. And, the women, the working class women of Paris are frustrated with still not having any bread. The prices are skyrocketing, and there's food shortages, and it's making it impossible for their families to survive. And then they see the Queen or hear about the Queen's lavish lifestyle. We've seen the pictures of her wigs and all of her gowns and her fancy jewelry, and just seem very uncaring. And they are going to march into Versailles, which is 12 miles from Paris, and they are going to storm Versailles and pretty much demand the king and the queen return to Paris to live in the Tuileries Palace, where they can kind of keep an eye on them. But again, what happens is when the women do break into the palace of Versailles, they are going to clash with the royal guards. They're going to kill several of the king's guards, and they're again going to parade their heads on strikes and on pikes. And even though the sans-culottes are not the main force behind this particular march, it kind of sets that precedent for direct violent action. And it'll later be used to pressure the Jacobins into enacting their radical policies. Again, early British depiction of the sans-culottes, even though they saw themselves as defenders of liberty and equality, the British are hearing about all of these things that are happening in Paris, and they depict them in newspapers as savage and animalistic figures with ragged clothing and aggressive behavior and violence. And of course, they don't, in Britain, they don't want that same revolution to happen in their country. But this kind of gives the people in Britain seeing a kind of a warning of this revolution and a glimpse of what could happen if the lower classes were given too much power. So moving forward, as the French Revolution became more radical, the Jacobins, which are one of the most influential political groups at that time, are going to rely heavily on these Parisian workers and the sans-culottes for their support. And we're familiar with them being led by Maximilien Robespierre, who the Jacobins really believe in a more centralized government. And even at the beginning here, Robespierre is not on board with violence and bloodshed. Over time, he will be more convinced and be part of that. But they are going to share the sans-culottes' desire for social and economic equality. One of the biggest victories for the sans-culottes is going to come with the passage of the Law General Maximum in 1793, which is going to set price controls on essential goods like bread and flour, which is the staple of the French diet at that time. And they're hoping that this will help create some stability for food and help the common people be able to afford that. And for the working class, this is a major success. It shows that their demands are being taken seriously. The only problem was the merchants and the farmers are going to resent these price controls, and they are going to argue that they disrupted trade and hurt their profits, and they're going to start hoarding that food, which is going to cause more problems eventually here. But beyond economic policies, they're going to have a key role in revolutionary justice. They're going to be active participants in the Revolutionary Tribunal, which is a court system designed to prosecute the enemies of the revolution. Eventually, they'll be part of big trials like the execution of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette, and so they're part of kind of directly shaping this revolutionary justice, and the Jacobins need them for this. They have a lot of influence at this time. However, you're going to see some of those demands are going to start being taken away from them, not taken as seriously. So as the revolution progressed, the once powerful alliance between the Jacobins and the sans-culottes began to unravel, and the Jacobins, who had initially relied on the sans-culottes to enforce radical policies and maintain public support, by 1793, their relationship becomes very strained, and the sans-culottes are not satisfied with the progress of the revolution. They want even more extreme economic reforms, including tighter price controls and those higher wages and harsher measures against the wealthy. And so for the Jacobins, this growing radicalism is going to start becoming a problem. They had spent years consolidating power through the Committee of Public Safety, and by late 1793, they start seeing the sans-culottes not as allies, but as a destabilizing force that is going to possibly threaten their control. And so Robespierre and Louis Saint-Just, known as the Archangel of Terror, begin to distance themselves from the very people that helped them rise to power. And to counter this, the Jacobins expand the law of suspects in 1793, which is the sans-culottes are behind this because they want to get rid of those people that are suspected of opposing the revolution. And again, we go back to those merchants and those farmers who are hoarding food and driving the prices of that food up. So the law of suspects, they want to crack down on that. And the Jacobins, however, are going to start targeting the sans-culottes leaders, and we'll see that happening in 1794, March 1794. We get some of the radical leaders. They want to silence their own former allies, and so we're going to see their strongest supporters being executed, Jacques Hébert, and this is kind of a clear sign that the Jacobins are willing to eliminate anyone who threatened their grip on power. So what was once a powerful grassroots movement was now more systematically dismantled, and we'll see that the suppression continued. By 1794, the Reign of Terror had reached its peak, and no one, not even the revolution's own leaders, was safe. Robespierre, who had, kind of led this whole thing and the champion of radical revolution, he's now ruling through fear, and he does all kinds of other things, changing the calendar and getting rid of religion and kind of ruling by reason. And so he relied on terror to maintain that control, and believing that anyone who opposed the revolution was also a traitor. And paranoia is going to start growing. And once we get into July, known as Thermidor, the 9th of Thermidor, everything's going to change. Robespierre is going to stand before the convention. He's going to deliver this speech that is filled with so many threats against the people that he is speaking to in this convention. And he's going to pretty much hint that there are more enemies that need to be eliminated and that they're in that room. So that's going to spark some paranoia. That's kind of the final straw for the other people that are there and hearing this. And he's going to be arrested and declared an enemy of the revolution. The next day he will be coincidentally sent to the guillotine, and that's going to mark the end of the Reign of Terror. and a major shift away from the extreme radicalism and toward a more moderate government. But also, the Sans-Calais is going to kind of be sidelined, disorganized at this time. So with no political representation and growing economic hardship, the Sans-Calais are going to go to the streets and start to uprise again. And you're going to see that in the Germinal and Prairial insurrections. The Germinal one is a little bit more peaceful demonstration. Thousands of workers are going to storm the National Convention and demand the return of Jacobin policies. Instead, their demands are not listened to. The government declares a major state of emergency. They send in troops, and many of them the Sans-Calais are exiled or imprisoned. One that gets a little bit more heightened in violence is going to be the Prairial uprising. And they're going to, again, attempt to force the government to reinstate radical economic reforms, but without the support from the army or political allies, they get easily crushed. And so these failed uprisings mark the end of the Sans-Calais as a political force. And the Thermidorian government is going to continue to try to restrict their public protest, making sure that the working class had no path back into politics. One such way is through the Constitution of 1795, and this new framework completely reshapes who held power in France. So unlike the earlier revolutionary ideas that promoted popular participation, this Constitution is going to impose property-based voting rights, and that means that only those who owned a certain amount of property could vote or hold office. And so for the Sans-Calais, the working class revolutionaries that had fought for the equality, this is going to be seen as devastating. So now they find themselves systematically included or excluded from politics. And the Thermidorian government, which took power after Robespierre, wanted to restore order and prevent future uprisings. And so to do that, they needed to make sure that the most radical voices, which is the Sans-Calais, had no way else to influence their decision making. And this shift is going to mark the beginning of a government led by the bourgeoisie or the wealthier middle class. And again, the Sans-Calais is going to be kind of pushed to the sidelines. So this Constitution doesn't just disenfranchise the urban working class. It's going to make it clear that the radical worker activism was over. And the Sans-Calais were not the only revolutionaries in history to rise as a powerful force, only to be suppressed once they become too radical or too difficult to control. We've seen the same things happen in the Russian Revolution when leftist groups like the Left Socialist Revolutionaries and anarchists pushed for extreme land redistribution, and they support Lenin and the Bolsheviks. But eventually they're going to be purged from the government. Same thing in the American Revolution with the Sons of Liberty, who were central in organizing protests and revolutionary action. And again, the American government will be dominated by wealthy landowners and merchants. And again, the Iranian Revolution in 1979, same thing happened there. So, to kind of sum it up, the Sans-Calais are one of the most powerful forces in the French Revolution. They're just ordinary workers and artisans, and they are going to help drive radical change. They had fought for economic justice and direct democracy and a government that truly represented the common people, but they become too extreme for the very government that they help bring to power. And people are going to see their demands as a threat to stability, and we have, by 1794, the Jacobins turn against them, and using the law of suspects to arrest and execute radical leaders, Robespierre will eventually fall, and this kind of completely dismantles their influence and stripping them of their political rights under the Constitution of 1795. And again, we see this happen throughout history. the American Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the Iranian Revolution. In the end, the workers of Paris, the sans-culottes, should be remembered not just for their radicalism, but for their role in proving that working people can shape history. And their fight for economic fairness and political participation continues to inspire movements today, showing those that even without wealth or privilege, you have the power to demand change, but change must be balanced with stability to last. So, thank you for listening to my presentation, and have a good day.